who is so impressive he has a 2-page bio. Ronnie.
Wow.
Okay. So Ronnie Mosley is the director and founder of Georgia Millennials Movement, where Georgia Millennials build power in communities to wield the 2014 legislative session and November elections. And I can tell you, he is doing it. Ronnie has yet to cease his passion in civic engagement, and in 2012, co-founded ICANN, the Intercollegiate Action Network, a student and youth think tank that works to impact policy, influence social culture, and direct the new generation of political engagement. In its founding year, the group organized thousands of students throughout the metro Atlanta area in opposition to the execution of Troy Davis, the shooting death of Trayvon Martin, and also directed student engagement during the 2012 presidential election. Just this past 2013 legislative session, the group led the blockage of the bill that would have allowed guns on college campuses throughout Georgia. We're going to get an update on that because the Georgia legislature is back in session. By the way, this is an old bio of Ronnie's. This was his bio from November, and he has accomplished a lot since then. A Chicago native, Ronnie has experience dealing with several public issues such as gun violence, education, youth health, workers' rights, and entrepreneurship. His passion for advocacy has been featured in the media outlets like CNN, NPR, Al Jazeera, and Danish Broadcasting Corporation. So now I'm going to kick it over to my friend Ronnie.
Thanks, Emily. And I want to share with you guys my friend, Mary Pat. Mary Pat is the National Youth Director for National Action Network, which is one of the nation's largest civil rights organizations. In addition to that, she's also a youth leader for Usher's New Look Foundation. And finally, she wears a lot of hats. She's a Peace First Prize Fellow, and that's her national campaign called Just Think Twice, which educates youth on nonviolence and other issues crippling our generation. Mary Pat and I are in the same city, and for me, that's such a huge honor because being with a hometown hero, I'm from Chicago, I love Chicago. To be with someone that loves Atlanta just as much as I love Chicago and work on these issues together, I couldn't ask for a better partner in Atlanta. One interesting fact about her is, so I attend Morehouse College. She has aspirations and will attend Spelman College. So this is a Spellhouse connection that you're looking at. And if you know anything, Lauren is a Spelman alumni. If you know anything about Spellhouse, we change the world.
So I'm going to be introducing a good friend of mine named Sarah. And I thought it was funny because me and Sarah actually met on the internet, and we were working and fighting against the same cause, which is gun violence in our community. So Sarah's a senior at Newtown High School. Her mom is a teacher at Sandy Hook Elementary School, and she's also a survivor of the shooting that happened that December in 2012. After the shooting at Sandy Hook Elementary School, Sarah's former elementary school, she decided to take that painful experience and put it into something positive and actually take action against gun violence. And so she started the Junior Newtown Action Alliance, and she's been working hard against gun violence ever since.
Thank you. Well, I have the great honor of introducing my friend Colin Goddard. Just a preface, if it wasn't for Colin, I probably wouldn't even be in this fight. So anyway, born in Nairobi, Kenya, to English and American parents working in international development, Colin grew up in Somalia, Bangladesh, Indonesia, and the U.S. He completed high school in Cairo, Egypt, and returned to the U.S. to graduate with a BA in International Studies from Virginia Tech in 2008. But while he was in his 4th year at Virginia Tech, Colin was shot 4 times. He survived the April 16th, 2007 shooting where 32 people were killed. He still has 3 of the 4 bullets in his body, as well as a titanium rod implanted in his left femur. Now an activist at Mayors Against Illegal Guns, Colin uses his experience to educate others about the realities of gun violence and the problems in U.S. gun laws. The story of how he became involved in gun violence prevention is documented in the short film Living for 32, which you should all look into seeing if you haven't already. Colin appears in numerous media interviews, engagement events, and spends time lobbying Congress and state legislatures. He also uses the film Living for 32 to share his story in an effort to educate, advocate, and mobilize Americans to get involved in preventing gun violence. And Colin now lives and works in Washington, D.C.
Hello? All
Thanks, Sarah. I'll admit I have heard of Mr. Baker, but this is my first time I met him. So I'm introducing Mr. Biko Baker, Rob Biko Baker.
New friends, new
Yes,
friends.
new friend, who is the executive director of the League of Young Voters and a nationally recognized leader. Based in Milwaukee, Baker is a pioneer in running city-level, data-driven voter turnout campaigns that dramatically increase the voter participation of young urban citizens. A leading voice on field campaigns targeting young African-American voters, Baker serves on Circle's Research Advisory Board and is a board member of the New Organizing Institute. He is also a well-known communicator around elections, as well as cultural and political issues, including gun violence and voting rights. In addition to being a former contributor to The Source, he has appeared on C-SPAN, Fox News, and CNN. A popular and powerful speaker at conferences and events, Baker has interviewed luminaries Cornel West, Russell Simmons, and Howard Dean, and has been on panels with many of the nation's strongest progressive voices. Baker holds a PhD in history from UCLA.
Actually, Biko, let's just go right over to you. Let's go right over to Biko. So Biko, as someone who's been working on this issue for maybe a little bit longer than other people on the panel.
Saying I'm old.
No, I would never. I'd say experienced.
Thank you.
Yeah. What do you think you've seen in the last year to 2 years that is different than what you've seen before?
Yeah, I've seen. Thank you. I appreciate everyone for having me here. It's great to be here in Generation Progress. I almost called it Campus Progress, but I really appreciate it, Emily and Ann and everybody for working on this cause. And one of the things that I've seen over the last 2 to 3 years has been a focused effort by young people to push this policy. In the past, when we've worked on this issue at the statewide level, it's usually mothers against gun violence, people who have lost children, and then very passionate older white women. And what I've seen over the last 3 to 4 years is people stepping up from college communities and campus communities and say they're tired of it. And I actually heard Colin speak at an event that you guys hosted maybe 6 or 8 months ago, and I was very inspired by that. And I feel like people like him and people in this room are going to be what is going to shake the country up. Because unfortunately, for people like me who come from inner city communities, we know that gun violence has been the leading cause of death for black men since 1969. And so we're proud and happy that you guys are joining us in this cause.
Thank you. Okay, so as we go into more questions, so I want to go to you, Mary Pat, because I'm going to ask you a question that I think probably everybody in this room is going to get eventually.
Okay.
So on your bio, it says you started doing this work at 9. Is that real?
Yes.
Oh my God, she's a prodigy. So you're so young. Do you really know what you're doing? How are you going to make a difference?
Well, you know, people have always told me that. And when I was 13, I started working for one of the leading civil rights organizations, Reverend Al Sharpton's organization, National Action Network. And so sometimes they might not take me serious. Well, try not to take me serious because they're like, oh, well, you work for Al Sharpton, or oh, you try to stop us from using our guns, whatever. They try not to take me serious, but the thing is, they have to. And they have to respect me. Why? Because I'm out actually doing the work that they talk about doing. And so that's just something that they could say that I'm young all they want, but they can also say that I can mobilize young people. They can also say that I can get young people to, you know, educate them on these different things affecting our communities and actually get them on the ground and working with them like Ronnie and like Sarah. And so, you know, they might not take me serious, but they have to respect me, and they've been doing that for a very long time.
I think that's great. Okay, so Ronnie, you've had a big 2 weeks. There's been a big 2 weeks in the state legislature in Georgia. There's been an update on the bill. And I'm a big fan of people taking control of their situation. Ronnie maybe took a lot of control of his situation. And you and 23 of your colleagues were arrested in an act of civil disobedience.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a fan, or I'm not one to literally jump into jail. When I got arrested a few Mondays ago, it was my first time being ever arrested. First time that I was placed in handcuffs. I was booked. I was fingerprinted. I had a mug shot, which actually turned out to be a pretty good mug shot.
So there's a lesson right there.
Hey, always be ready. But no, seriously, I got arrested for the fight to repeal Stand Your Ground. And it was an issue, one, so dear to me because we're the ones that are out there that are losing our lives. This law does not work for us. I remember being at a NAACP meeting on campus, and a sophomore by the name of Nick was saying, well, I don't know if I want this law repealed because I would want this law to protect me. But it doesn't work for him. We have a case in Georgia where Herman Lee Smith was outside of a club. A witness testified and said that, yes, the victim approached him and others with a gun pointed in their direction. Herman shot and killed the victim. The judge told him that he didn't have reasonable belief that his life was in danger. Now, all of us pretty much know about Stand Your Ground through Trayvon Martin and Jordan Davis, two individuals that we know weren't the perpetrators. They didn't encroach on anyone. They didn't really pose a threat, in my view. But to hear that on the opposite side and see how we're prosecuted, and when I say we, I'm really talking about definitely youth and African Americans, that how this doesn't work for us, but it works for others, is unjust. The big part out of that, what I didn't expect, was so many more youth that came out and said, well, Ronnie, next time I want to be with you. So I had to ask the question. I said, wait, are you talking about getting arrested, or are you just talking about rallying? And they said, no, we're ready to get arrested too. So the fight that we're facing in Georgia is not just to repeal Stand Your Ground, but also keeping public safe, or keeping safe zones safe. There's a bill that will allow guns in churches, bars, airports, campuses. It really increases guns in public places. And last legislative session, we raised our voices, and I think it was a true testament to how youth are powerful, because that bill didn't pass. No gun legislation passed. And so when they started this year, they started from scratch. But they're really making it pretty much legal for you to carry a gun, whether you have a permit, training, anything. If you have a gun, you want to use it. Prime example, Stand Your Ground under this new law will be extended, which means that if I shot Mary Pat with an illegal gun, I can say I stood my ground. Now, we know from experience I would still go to jail, but for others, it doesn't really give us a just sense.
So you guys in Georgia are currently working on this legislation, trying to keep guns off of campuses, airports, schools, places of worship. And Colin, you've had some experience with this in other states. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so this guns on campus idea has been around for a few years. Virginia Tech was the shooting that really people started to say, like, hey, why don't you just put a gun in that classroom and they can shoot the bad guy and then that's it. And people just don't realize that, like, when you do that, you make actually the everyday situation more dangerous, and there's no guarantee that's actually going to work. It's just a bad idea. And so,
Colin, people have actually said that to you, right?
Yeah, and I get why people say that. In their minds, they think, oh, someone's going to shoot me, I just want to shoot them first. Like, that's very simple. In reality, it's quite different, and it's just a bad policy. It's like we can't do anything until maybe the last second if we shoot them first. And I'm like, why are we looking at the last second? Why can't we just back this up and think about how this person and this gun came together in the first place with this idea and try to do something about that? Like, we're better than just throwing it up and just trying to shoot our way out of these problems. So they thought this was going to happen in Arizona and Texas, states where politically they had, Republicans had control. They thought it was going to be done deal. People were writing about it in the newspaper like this was going to happen. It was in the stars. It was going to happen. And because we got young people out on college campuses in both those states, in Texas, thank God UT Austin is right across the street from the Capitol. We had a walkout in the middle of class, 12 o'clock noon. Kids just got up and walked out and assembled in front of the Capitol building and held a rally for like 500 kids. And they walked in the middle of them and the members of Congress. And ultimately, we got that bill killed like two sessions in a row. In Arizona, same deal. Thought it was going to happen. We had students post up in front of like the big freshman classrooms, and as soon as they let out, they all hand out these like little postcards saying, "Do you support the idea of guns on campus? Yes, no, maybe," and like give you a reason why. And on the back side, it was like, "Check this box if you want to mail it to your congressman." And so we sent these out, like thousands of them, and we got them all back, and the ratio was overwhelmingly opposed to this idea of forcing guns on college campuses. And we didn't have to like even take out the bad ones. It was overwhelmingly in opposition. And so we took that giant pile, walked it over to the state capitol, and literally dumped it in offices and said, look, this is the people who you represent. These are the people talking to you. You need to listen to the majority of people who wrote this down. The legislature passed it. It went to the governor. We did the same thing to the governor. We sent emails, phone calls. I think we put messages on birds and sent it to her. I mean, we did everything. And she vetoed it. First time in her life she ever vetoed a piece of, bad gun policy. And she said, I was inundated with messages that I didn't think I would get. And it was because we stood up and we got unified and we made our voices heard, and it stopped. And we can do that in Texas. We do that in Arizona. We can do it in Georgia. We can do it everywhere if you guys get involved.
And so actually having heard that story, Sarah, I know that you've been talking to Colin for a long time about things like this. And when people think about lobbying, what Colin was just describing is actually basically lobbying. And you think about lobbying and you're like, ugh, they're disgusting. I don't want to do it. Although maybe not everyone has Jewish grandmothers like mine. But, you think, I don't want to do that. But so what Colin was talking about was actually lobbying to change laws to make a change. And honestly, there's not a lot of high school students that do that. But Sarah, I think you've taken almost 10 lobby trips, which is pretty unusual for a high school student. What's that been like for you?
It's definitely been such a learning experience. Before I, was involved in this movement, I never would have, I sort of saw lobbying as that stigma, like an old white man with a briefcase and a suit on Capitol Hill. But when I sort of started getting involved in the movement and I started seeing that one of the biggest points that we need to be stronger is reaching out to our legislators. I, wondered if we could just go ourselves. And, the first time that I lobbied, I was in a group of about, 6 or 7 other adults. I was the only young person in the group. And I sort of saw, how each meeting would go the same way. Our biggest point of emphasis in each meeting was telling our stories, which I think is, the most important thing that we have on the side of the movement. So they would, go through the same motions every meeting, every, lobbying trip. And I started realizing, the more I spoke up, I saw the environment and the climate of the room sort of shift. Whether I was speaking with the legislator themselves or a staff member, they were always surprised, I think, when I walked into the meeting because they didn't typically see high school students, with a group of adults lobbying on the Hill on a school day. So, and so that sort of implanted an idea in my mind. And the next lobbying trip, I put together sort of basic information, what I learned from my lobbying trip, what worked, what didn't. And I trained about 10 students from Newtown, high school and college students. And the next time we went to DC to lobby, I made sure that our groups were completely made up of young people. And those meetings were completely different. They were not only surprised to see a young person, but they were just completely taken aback to see a group of young people take off 2 days of school to meet, legislators that they've only maybe seen on television as talking heads on the news. And they were willing to tell their entire story. We have members who lost siblings in Sandy Hook. My mom survived Sandy Hook. So we have very, very intense personal stories, and we were willing to share those with these legislators, and that completely changed the game. They were definitely more responsive, I think, in the meetings that I had that were completely made up of young people. They were more willing to have an open dialogue, I found. I think one issue with sort of the adult gun violence prevention movement is sometimes that both sides get caught up in this the same repetitive rhetoric over and over again, and they don't go beyond that. And I found that a lot of times in the meetings where it was just with students, we had new ideas, we had new ways that we could work with the legislators back in their communities, sort of these non-conventional ways to address it. So I found that when we were lobbying just with young people, they were definitely excited by our new ideas and by our stories. So that's sort of my experience with youth lobbying. I think it's so important to continue that, no matter if you're doing it on the local level, the state level, the national level, because they really, whether they're on your side or not, at least right now, they do want to hear you and they do want to see you, and that's definitely real.
Great. So, Biko, you and I first met talking about elections, trying to get young people out to vote. We meet again here. Why these two issues? Why do these connect to you? And what do you think it means to once the people get elected into office?
I think, and I really appreciate I started doing gun violent issues when I was like 17 at the Boys and Girls Club. You know, I was like the basketball, soccer coach, football coach, that coach everything. And then when it was too hot, we played chess, and I'd be the chess coach. And I had a cohort of kids who were like 15, 14 years old. And when they started hitting 17, 18, 19, I get reports of them getting murdered. In fact, you know, I was living in L.A. and I had a call, and 3 kids from alternative school that I was working at were murdered in a matter of a year. And it's tough because these kids were from inner city communities. No one listened. No one really cared, because that's what happens in the hood. Or at least that's what we've been told was happened in the hood. And we would fight, and we would get loud, and city council wouldn't listen to us. Fight, we get loud, state legislators wouldn't listen to us. But by the time we started registering voters and showing up to lobby meetings and sending text messages to call bad legislators, we saw how people started paying attention to us very quickly. And it's been 10 years since our organization has existed, and within 10 years, I've seen complete changes in City Hall, where I'm from. Like, they didn't want to have young people in there. Now they have poetry contests in there, so young people don't vote them out. And that's because of the size and power of the millennial generation. Like, y'all are so powerful. These people on these Capitol Hills and all of our communities in here, they have very bad ideas. A lot of them are very old and don't care, and I'm just keeping it 100 with you. You can cuss me out later. But we have so much influence with our votes that we can change the conversation, and they're gonna make us be afraid. You know, some of us have had death threats, but I feel like through the power of our vote, midterm elections, 2016, we can completely turn this around.
I think you're right. Okay, so just prepare. I'm asking one more question, and then it's going to go to you guys. So start thinking of your questions right now, if you haven't been already. So Colin, we have to talk about your undercover hidden camera. We couldn't get through without it.
Right. So, you know, I mean, getting shot was an eye-opening experience. You know, I was one of many Americans, I think, who thought that if, you know, it wasn't going to happen to me as long as I went to a good school or, like, associated with good people. And in my French class, I was nearly shot and killed. And I realized, like, you can't think like that, because that's just not true. And then I'm like, well, license for it. I was shocked to learn that we don't do either of those. In fact, we don't even do a background check before you buy the gun in every case. And like something as simple as a background check, it takes like 90 seconds. I thought that was just so unreal. But it was still like a kind of a concept. It wasn't real. So I said, how can we make this real? Let's show people what this really means. And so I knew that gun shows were a place where I could go and buy a gun without a background check. I knew the internet is also like the gun show that happens every day, that you can buy guns without background checks on the internet. But the gun shows was something that was happening in the neighborhood, happening in physical places that I could show up with a camera and document. So I got the idea together of a button camera on my shirt, a black button, black shirt, and I put the logistics of how much I need to buy a gun and it all together, found some wealthy people, they hooked it up with some money, put the whole project I get together in like a couple weeks, and the first 3 people we asked to fund it, they all funded it. They thought it was a great idea, and we just looked through the internet and found gun shows and waltzed in there with the recording button on. And I walked up to random people I'd never met before and said, how much for that Glock? $600. Here you go. Thank you, I'll be out. And that was it. Got it all on camera. I bought Glock 9mm, got Walther 22s, the same guns used to shoot me. Bought Mac 11s, Tech 9s, AKs. I bought it all. No questions asked, no paperwork, nothing. And got it all on tape. If you YouTube Guns for Cash, you can watch like the best of the worst, whatever. But it's just an example of how to make kind of a concept or like an issue that we're working about in the people don't think is real. Make it real. Make it visible for them. Put it in front of their faces and say, are you okay with this? Like, look at this. This is happening down the street. This is happening in your neighborhood. And so that was just one project that is the best video that the Brady campaign that I worked when I did it, the best video they've ever put on YouTube, because it takes a concept and, like I said, it puts a face on it. And the more we can figure out interesting ways of showing an idea, of of explaining this concept of what we're trying to do. I think the more people we can open their eyes, they don't have to have something happen to them before they have the same understanding that we all do. And we get more people making those phone calls, showing up at those meetings, and ultimately getting the votes that we need, and changing things and making it a better place for all of us. And so that's just one small idea that we made to fruition. And I'm sure there are a billion other ideas in this group of people that you get some things together. Hopefully after this weekend, you get a real concrete set of ways to execute, and then we help you execute it. And you can help touch some more people.
So when you guys go home and your parents and your friends ask you what you learned this entire weekend, what I'm hoping you'll say is that Biko told me to vote. What you're probably going to say is that Colin and Ronnie told me to go undercover and get arrested. But when you think that, please also remember that Biko told you to vote. Okay, so we're going to take it to the audience. Who thought of a good question? Who's ready to go?
Not everybody at one time.
Yeah. Here, Jamira, I'm going to take my microphone over to you.
Thank you. So my question is, because I think all of us have come here from all over the country, and we all recognize that gun violence looks different in our community. So how do we get people in Newtown to care about little black boys in North Philadelphia and vice versa?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Here, Colin, Biko.
I'll pass it to Colin. I'm going to tell you what. 10 years ago, I walked in here and I'd be like, man, look at all these white people, man. They don't know nothing about my struggle. I can't deal with it. And then I started looking at the political map and realized the people making the decisions for my community didn't live in my community and weren't black legislators. And so I think it's very important that we look at common self-interest. We need Colin. You know what I'm saying? Like, brothers in the hood need people like Mike Skolnick, who's in here, because the powers that be that come from conservative communities have held on to power. They've done some stuff to redistrict. But together, as a generation, if we get over all the gang banging and all the racial silos and lunch table difficulties that we brought in high school, we can really turn this community around, because if you look at all the value polls, all the polling, young people of color and young white people on most issues see eye to eye, and that's the first time that's happened in our country. So we need people like y'all to come up and help us out.
I think a lot of times I sort of kick myself because I think about that question all the time. Just like Colin said, I never really, I remember hearing about stories. I remember hearing about Aurora, which happened 5 months before Sandy Hook, and I remember vividly, crying for those families with my mother who survived Sandy Hook 5 months later. And now I'm working with the families from Aurora, and I never, ever, ever would have thought that that would happen in my life. And so sometimes I kick myself because I question whether, if I had taken action, or, more Americans had taken action after so many different events and so many different reports, would I have been in this situation? And I kick myself because sometimes I always think that, all these towns around me, whether it's Danbury, Connecticut, or New Haven, or Bridgeport, or Hartford, they struggle with day-to-day gun violence, with gang violence, and they were right next to me, and I had no idea. And that, it bothers me to the core to this day. And so I think, when I was, this is sort of, I guess, almost a year now that Junior Newtown Action Alliance has been around, and we were sort of thinking about what we want our strategy to be this year, what we want our big goal to be this year in 2014. And in the past year that we've been around, we've really connected with a lot of students around Connecticut, no matter where they're from. And what we've found is that no matter what type of gun violence we experience, whether it's day-to-day gun violence or whether it's a mass shooting like at Sandy Hook, we understand each other's pain. We understand what it means to know somebody that died from gun violence, or to know or to be related to somebody who survived. So our goal for this year in Junior Newtown Action Alliance is to build bridges between those urban and suburban communities in Connecticut. We're doing that by teaching workshops, by have something as simple as having a lunch together and sharing our stories and talking about our similarities and our ideas for moving forward together. Those are sort of ways that we've done it in the past and that we really, really want to build on in the future, because we see that as really, if we can build those bridges now, I think like we've already started, like we have such a diverse group here. You know, I'm friends with Mary Pat, and we come from very different communities. We've experienced different types of gun violence, but we're really here for the same cause. And if we can really come to that conclusion together, then I think we can really, those coalitions are going to be what changes this movement.
I think the only way to really get people to care is to care ourselves. And what I mean by that is to continue to go out. You know, in Georgia, in North Carolina, they have something called Moral Mondays. Continue to go to the state capitals and just tell people who don't come from our communities what's going on, to let them know that, and this is what my mom, she brought it to my attention, that, you know, you would think that politicians that went to schools like Duke, Yale, and Harvard would have some sort of common sense not to put guns in college campuses and bars and schools, elementary schools. But I've learned that not all people with book smarts have common sense. And so, you know, it's to just continue as a young person to get more young people involved in the movement, to continue to go to the politicians who are supposed to help us in our communities, and to just fight for what we believe in. That's the only way you get people to care. You know, people like to put all the pressure on the president. But the president can't do anything for us if we don't do something for ourselves and help him, because he's just one person. Yeah.
So grassroots lobbying is obviously really, really important, but the decision comes down to the legislators. So how do you propose us to make that happen with our legislators? Is it putting more progressives in office? Is it just lobbying them till they get tired? What do you think is the solution for that?
I think it's a combination of both. You have to realize every year is not an election year. So you have to work with those in office. And the way that you work with them is letting them know what you want. It's calling. It's going to do direct actions in a senator's office who hides behind his door and calls the Capitol Police on you. But even more so, Biko talked about it earlier, really mobilizing our base. You know, if you follow anything about politics and millennials, you see the shift and the change that's about to happen. How millennials are getting ready to be this huge voting bloc, which also translates to more millennials in office. And I just always think about the words of Dr. King when he talks about if you want to see where society kind of places its value, look at the elders and look at the youth. And we already talked about how we have this same mindset. Those are two huge voting blocks. So now we just have to translate that power into those offices.
Yeah, we had a question back here.
Living in Metro Atlanta, since September of 2012, I've lost 28 friends to gun violence, and 5 of them were family friends. So they're like family to me. And seeing as though they're not on the news and they're not important, or their family didn't know the right people and didn't have enough money to go here, or get this done to where their cases could be heard, and telling adults and teachers, and they're saying, oh, that's sad, and oh, I really feel for you, but not getting anything done. What could I do as just one single black kid in Metro Atlanta to get my friend's story heard, to where something can be done with all the issues basically in Metro Atlanta?
Well, being from Atlanta and living in Atlanta, I completely and totally agree. I mean, looking at the Trayvon Martin case and looking at Jordan Davis, you notice that these boys were good. Like, they had all A's. They came from good homes. They were good. But to think about the different family members that I've lost, who didn't always make great decisions. You know, the president didn't go to their funerals, and probably will never know who they are. I think what we really need to do is just to let people know. You don't even have to let them know that gun violence is affecting African American people, because we already know that. But letting them know that this could happen to you. You could be hit by a stray bullet. And what you can do is just to continue to keep, you know, that alive, to continue to let them know that this could happen to you, and for you to do something. about it. Get involved in organizations like Vote Out Loud, like Speak Out Loud, like National Action Network, and the Millennials, and just continue to come to conferences like this and work with the leaders of tomorrow, and just work together.
A lot of times when I talk about gun violence prevention, I talk about sharing my story and why that's so important to me. One of the first times that I met Colin, he really ingrained in my mind the importance of sharing your story. You know, anybody can research the facts and statistics, but you have your story. You have those family members that you lost. You have those friends that you lost, and you know their stories. So I think, you know, when you ask what can I do as just one individual, I think a lot of times if you look at it as, you know, what is my responsibility as somebody who has these 28 stories in me, I can share those things. I can share those stories. I can share who they were and share their names. You know, whether that's writing an op-ed piece for your local newspaper, or, you know, whether that it's, you know, starting a blog. There are so many ways that you can share your story today. And there are so many people that want to listen, especially people in our generation. We want to know their names. We want to know their stories. We want to know, you know, good things that they did, and why we need to move forward in this movement in their honor. You know, one of the sort of mottos of Newtown Action Alliance is honoring with action. You know, take their stories, share them with others, and from there honor their lives by making change and by doing good. That's what you can do. I think that's the most important thing you can do, and I think that's what makes us different from the other side. They don't want us to continue talking about this. They don't want this conversation to continue. But if we continue sharing those stories and making this, showing that this is important to our generation, then we're already winning.
How old are you, bro? Ooh, 16. Man, I was 16, 1994. Y'all laughing, that's my story, damn. But, you know, violence has actually gone down in urban communities. And I got a lot of homies that have not made it, cousin, you know, friends, family members. And sometimes I sort of like freak out, like, how did I get here? Why am I here? And sometimes I get sad because, you know, when I look for my childhood friends, they're nowhere to be found. But I say this, you have so much power because you're here on a Friday night, you know, and you're in this room that's connected to some of the smartest people in the world, literally in this, through this convening. And so I would say as a young brother, you have to work every day, harder than anybody else. You'll have to study, understand the issues and problems better than anybody else. And then even when they're going to critique you, you got to stand strong in your square and believe that you are worthy of being a leader. But the thing you got to do, bro, you have to register voters where you're at. You have to get people involved in the campaigns. Because in Atlanta, I don't know, Atlanta's like Black Hollywood for some reason. Everybody doesn't pay attention to what's going on in the streets and the hood. But you start showing up to Kasim Reed's office with some voter registration cards and some plans, and even if it ain't all spelled right, he's gonna have to pay attention to you. So understand that you plus numbers equals power.
And you have to make, you know, make it not a statistic. Make it a face, put a face to it, make it real. Connect to that heart, not to the brain. Tell that story to Governor Deal. Tell that story to Mayor Reed. I mean, those are the stories that you as an elected official, a position of power, you hear that, you can't not address that. You can't not do something about that. And to the first point, that's not something, you know, being more aware of it now and having, you know, people who care more about the violence that happens in urban communities every day. It's not going to be something that happens overnight, but it is changing. It is happening. When people become more aware of these other events that are bigger and make the news, we become more aware of the ones that happen in between those big news cycles. And that story every day. And how many people were killed in Chicago the last weekend? The woman in Oakland who lost 2 sons in 3 weeks. I mean, those are stories that we're becoming more aware of. It's not something that's, like I said, it's not going to happen overnight. But because if we keep pushing it, if we keep talking about it, we keep putting these faces in front of other people's faces, keep making it real to people, then this is what will change the dial.
Great. So we have, I think, we have some ladies back here. 1, 2, 3.
Hi, I have a two-parter question. One is, how do we keep our communities from getting desensitized? Because I know I come from the hood, and I've been around it my entire life. And like the first day we moved into the house we're living at right now, our neighbor was shot and murdered in front of our house in the middle of the night. And it was such like a normal occurrence to me. I sort of just rolled over in bed after I heard the 4 gunshots and like went back to sleep. Like that wasn't, like at the moment, it was just something that happened. So like, how do we keep our communities from like just seeing it as something that happens and something we need to accept? And how do we keep that from being commonplace? And then the second question is, I heard someone mention gang violence. How do we keep our prosecution system from prosecuting our young boys of color, our young girls of color for seeking an alternative sort of family? Because I know a lot of people like sort of mark gangs as these violent, horrible, institutionalized sort of things. But the truth is that gangs sort of are an alternative family that some people seek, and I know that from experience. So how do we keep our young boys of color, our young girls of color from getting further prosecuted and further criminalized in our system while also fighting in our gun violence community as well? So, sorry, that was a lot.
That's a big, actually, you know what maybe we can do? Since we have 3 questions right in a row, why don't we get these 3 questions and then you guys can summarize.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Iffy Ike. I'm working on a campaign called Vote for Trayvon, and I actually wanted to ask you all somewhat of a different question. I know the young gentleman here said he was 16, and one of the areas that we're trying to work on is not just in the area of those who are eligible to vote, but our youth and our young children or young adults who are eventually, we hope, will be registered voters, but more so than just a number, will understand the importance of democracy before they're 18. So I just wanted to hear from all of you all what efforts you either are doing or you think are necessary for us to start working with our young children and kind of getting, when I was younger, they called it civics, but kind of getting some of these democratic educational curriculum back into the school system so that when it's 18, it's not a major push to force people. It's actually just part of the process.
Yeah, I think that's great. So we're going to get this one last question, and then we're going to go to each of you for your closing comments.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Nicole Tinson. My question is just in regards to what you feel has been your biggest feat and also your biggest win to date within this movement.
That's a pretty good one to kick off closing comments. So why don't we start with Ronnie again and move back down the line? That sound good?
My biggest win has to have been blocking this gun bill last legislative session. Like, you have to understand, in the state of Georgia, there is a supermajority of Republicans in the House. There's this close to supermajority in the Senate and a Republican-controlled governor's mansion. So for the gun rights advocates, they couldn't understand how in this state this bill did not pass, how they had so much trouble when Georgia has been called the gun-friendliest state in the nation or union, that they were met with this much defeat. So really, that was just the collective voices of millennials and students coming out and making so much noise. And my biggest feat was probably my junior year and senior year in high school. I lost a schoolmate by the name of Gregory Robertson. He was a freshman, played basketball. They had won the city championship. And as he came home from a playoff game, he was shot and killed on his block before they can park the car. And so the year before that, I had gathered folks. We rallied. We went down to the Federal Thompson building, which houses some of the state legislators' offices, and we got them to pass a bill unanimously. But this time around, when we went down to Springfield and everything, the bill failed. And for me, and I guess in quote-unquote leadership, it was a rough point for me because I had really gained the trust of so many folks and told them that this is what we need to do. This worked last time, and it'll work this time. And for it not to work again was just a really challenging point, I guess, in my life.
People ask me what I think my biggest win has been so far all the time. And I still honestly couldn't tell you because I'm still going on through the movement and through life, quite honestly. So I couldn't tell you that. But my biggest feat would have to be just being young. You know, people still don't, like I said, they still don't take me serious, but they do respect me because I'm, you know, they hear me talk and they love me. And then they find out that, you know, I'm still a teenager, and that completely and totally turns them off, and they don't want to hear what I have to say anymore. And so that would have to be my biggest feat when it comes to people in different communities being desensitized to gun violence. I think as young people and knowing young people who don't always make the best decisions, you know, they don't think about the consequences. Not only do they not think about the consequences, they don't think about the families that they're hurting. Not only do they not think about the families that they're hurting, but they're hurting themselves, and they do things like shoot other people because they feel like that's the only way they can survive. And that's people in urban communities. When you think about people in other communities, you know, it's not real to them. And Sarah and Colin made great points. Make it personal. The only way that they're going to open their eyes and not be desensitized to gun violence because they think it affects African American people only is to make it personal. Continue to remind them, you know, that there was a shooting in Virginia Tech, that there was a shooting in Sandy Hook, and it's not just a black issue, but it's a people issue, and something needs to be done.
Just in terms of the last question, I think you know, Anne mentioned the failure of the background checks bill last April, and it still sort of strikes me every time somebody says that that was also one of the worst days of their lives, because it definitely was for me too. On April 17th, which was the day they were supposed to vote on the background checks bill, I was actually on a student delegation trip in Europe, and I knew sort of in the back of my mind that this was the day. I was sort of nervous all day. I wasn't really involved in what we were doing as a group. And we came home to my host sister's apartment, and we were just sort of getting ready to go to dinner soon, and I heard a ping on my iPod while I was checking Facebook. So I turned it off, turned it back on to see what it was, and it was an NBC breaking news update that said the background checks bill had failed. And I don't think I had felt that sense of hurt and betrayal since 12/14, since the shooting in Newtown. I didn't really know what to do with myself. And so in the next couple days, I sort of tried to move forward, tried not to think about it too much. And I'll always remember this moment. It was a couple days later, and I was sort of, because I had been involved in the gun violence prevention movement since 12/14, I was sort of looped in to some emails that went back and forth between other leaders in the gun violence prevention movement. And I remember the first one that I saw was from somebody who had been in it for probably longer than I've been alive. He had lost a son years and years ago to gun violence, and he just said in the email, "This happened, it's over, let's move forward." And at first I was a little bit angry at that. I was like, you have been working on this for so long. How could you possibly say this? You've lost a family member. How can you just move forward? But then I sort of rethought that question, and I realized, you know, how can people have such strength and resilience, such courage to be able to take a defeat, not necessarily as a loss, but as part of our story as we move forward, something that we can shove in other people's faces and say, this happened, how can that be? And that's sort of one of the greatest lessons I think that I've ever learned in my life. So even though I think the background checks bill failure last April was one of our biggest defeats, I also see it as really a turning point in not only my involvement and lessons that I learned, but also in terms of the movement.
Good questions. I'll start with the last one, though. And people talk about this vote that failed. People got to realize that was the first vote that we had in the United States Senate in terms of good gun laws in like 20 years, right? The first vote in 20 years, and we got a vote. That's a victory. And despite the news articles writing that this bill failed, if you guys look at the count, we actually had a majority of U.S. senators vote for it. We had 55. In normal politics, that's your win. In politics nowadays, with the rules, you need 60. But we had a majority, and we had the first vote in 20 years. That's a victory. I know it didn't go the right way, and like I said, the news media will say it's a loss. They're so fatalistic when it comes to, can we actually change something? But we did. We got a vote, and we had a majority. And we're going to have another vote next time, and it's going to be more than 55. And it's just a matter of time before we hit that 60. To the second question about civics and engagement. Most of my friends don't know what the hell I do. They don't know, like, how I work or, like, what do I actually do in my 9 to 5. And so it takes me explaining it to them, laying it out for them. And then when they see the article that comes over the newspaper or I post on Facebook, I'm like, yeah, I was a part of that. Like, I helped pass that bill, or I helped, you know, keep that bill from becoming law. Like, I made that headline. And they're like, wow. Like, you can, like, they just don't know how to get involved. They just, you know, they think of politics, and it's unfortunate that we have a low trust in institutions. We have a low trust in government. Things are not functioning well. But we have to understand that they're not functioning well because we don't have a lot of people participating in it. And we got to get more people in it to change that dynamic. And so civics is it. You just have to explain what it is you do and show how it is you actually manifest and change things in the real world. And to the first question, the desensitization. People get desensitized when they don't know a way out, when they don't know that there is another way to be, that they think this is something that is just inevitable. And so that comes with education, things about like background checks, things with laws, but also things with simple conflict resolution, simple things of another job, of furthering your education. Like, you have to show people there is a way out. And when they see that light, when you're able to touch someone and share that, that's when they say, okay, this is something that we're just not going to stand for. And then things change. Good questions.
These are good questions, and I'm just thinking about how to answer them and get my final points in. 2006, we had a hearing for the responsible gun ownership bill, basically very similar to the state, the Senate's bill. And we hosted it in the middle of the hood. We're like, there's no way these NRA folks are going to come down to the hood, North Avenue, King Drive. They're not going to show up. What? Do you know they showed up in suits, farmer outfits? You know, we rolled in some. They did. We had like mothers, literally, sons got murdered. You know, double homicides, triple homicides. They came in and they kicked our ass, man. They kicked our ass. There was nothing we could really do. You know, our folks got up very emotional. Guys with the suits came in very logical. You know, these high-priced lobbyists and lawyers. And to be honest, I didn't even really want to deal with gun violence for a long time, you know, other than sort of interrupting it. Because, you know, if you live in the hood and got family members, you're always trying to calm someone down from doing something wild. But since Sandy Hook, I've seen tons of people talking about this. And, you know, I was blessed with the opportunity. I have a connection to Snoop. He made a song called No Guns Allowed. And I wrote him an open letter. And Snoop was like, okay, we're going to keep rocking with it. You know, just a regular song. Got the OG, who's done a lot behind the scenes to interrupt violence, really killed beef and hip-hop in the West Coast. And we've never gotten a grant to do gun violence. It's been something we spend our general operating money on because it's so passionate to our community. But working with Snoop, we've seen now we've been able to sort of make nonviolence cool. And we've talked to other celebrities, big name players. We're talking to Richard Sherman's foundation. And we're hoping to leverage the celebrity of these brothers who have made violence cool and to sort of now give back to younger brothers and sisters to make it not cool. And I believe in telling the stories, but we need to pass legislation that's good. And we've recently been part of an effort to pass minority impact statements. And what these bills do is they track, like environmental impact statement, the impact that a piece of policy will have on a community, a minority communities. And if in any state where they're stand your ground or they're going to try to pass stand your ground, if you do this minority impact statement, you will see that these laws disproportionately impact people of color. And so then we have leverage and the numbers and the data to fight back. And so I would say, yes, we got to tell stories, but we got to get deep into the weeds of the policy, folks. Who does policy here? Yes, we need more people doing that because it's going to be in the weeds of these wonky 50-line paragraph sentences or 50-line. Let me just shut up. We need policy. All right.
Thank you. So you guys may have noticed there was another name up here. She didn't make it in time for the panel. But there is a wonderful woman in the audience, Erica Ford, who I was introduced by my good friend Michael Skolnick, who we'll hear from tomorrow. So Erica, if you wouldn't mind coming up here, we'd actually love to hear some closing words from you. This has been an incredible panel, and there have been really good questions and great ideas. We would just love to hear some words for you as we sort of process and digest this and get ready for the whole weekend ahead of us.
It took me 3 airlines and 2 airports to get here, but I'm here. You know, and I just walked in, but I liked the conversation. I heard the question. This young lady was talking about when the brother basically said, move on. And what happens is a lot of times we get emotionally connected and we get lost in the emotion of the act, whether it was us losing our child, which is at the highest degree, or not passing a bill, or not giving us money, not picking up our call. We get lost in those as leaders, because these are all leaders in the house, right? Yeah. And, we got to stay focused on our vision. It's not about us all doing policies, but if there's one person doing policies, then what is the role in which what we do in our lane can support the policy, not us trying to go into the lane of doing policies, and finding out how we can bring synergy to the work that we collectively do so that we can all support each other and make this gun violence issue a voice that we're all articulating in a very succinct way, so that people know that there's not just an Erica Ford or any of the people here individually in your cities and your towns, but there's a collective movement of various different people from various different walks of life doing various different things that are all important to what we're doing. I just came back from India last week, and one of the things that we talked about the most was, and my Mike Skolnick back there, who works with Russell, he's gonna laugh because, I'm usually one of those, I'm 48 years old, and I've been doing this work around gun violence since I was 18 years old. And I was one of those very angry leaders, organizers in the community. And when we work from a place of anger, we don't connect with people because we're moving 500 miles an hour. And so therefore, when you talk about your neighbor and people not feeling compassion for the issue, it's because we're not feeling compassion to them. So it's not really about what they can do, it's about what we need to do to change how we relate to the people who we want to be our comrades, who we want to be our allies. Because we mostly go to them, you gotta do this, and if you don't do this, and, people might, say, yo, what's up? I got your back. Yeah, yo, she's crazy. I ain't getting down with her. When you leave. So we really have to look at our inner connection to what it is that we're doing and what it is that we say that we want to think. We do a lot of work with Deepak and Russell and all of them used to call me the angry peacemaker, So the transformation of our own lives transforms the lives of people around us, transforms the nation, transforms how these young people relate, because these are our young people. This is not no miracle question or miracle thing. It's just about how we step up our work and really take our work and our commitment and our mission and our own lives to another level so that we can really reduce violence. We can't stop nothing in the world. We're not stopping anything. But we can reduce some stuff. We can make a people's lives a little better. We can help people have compassion for mothers and fathers who've lost their children, brothers and sisters who've lost their siblings, and really just have people stop suffering every day and live in a space of freedom and love. All right?
Thank you. Okay. take a deep breath. We're going to let it out tonight. We're going to think about, I think that's an amazing phrase to think about how we can be, what is it, angry peacemakers. Exactly. You guys have internalized it already. This is great. Thank you so much for our panel. So now, let's give them another round. They were great. So now Allison's going to come back and give us some logistics about wrapping up tonight and coming back in the morning. Allison?
Great. First of all, I know we just did a round of applause, but let's give another